Well, you guys, thank you so much for being here today. We are right now in Breakout Room 2, Session 2, Housing Infrastructure and the $160 billion Plan. With that, we can go ahead and introduce our first speaker. I'd like to call to the stage Ray Major. So Ray is the Chief Economist and Chief Data and Analytics Officer for SANDAG, and he has over 20 years of experience in private sector, as well as he's senior executive serving in a variety of leadership roles, including Vice President and Chief Marketing Officer at Nielsen and CEO at Halo Business Intelligence. He's here to provide a brief overview of the county's regional plan, which was recently approved by SANDAG.
So Ryan called me a couple of weeks ago and asked me if I would introduce this panel, and he said he wanted me to talk about the $160 billion plan, and that's a 4,000-page document. So I said, okay, good, I'll do the whole morning session and get everybody up to speed on all 4,000 pages. He said, no, you have 15 minutes. So I might be missing a few things that are in the plan, but I'd really like to give you kind of a high overview of what the plan is really about. So the SANDAG is the San Diego Association of Governments. We're the regional planning agency. Our job is really to kind of plan the infrastructure for the region, the transportation infrastructure. That's one of the things that we do. The 2021 regional plan was approved by the SANDAG Board of Directors in the end of December. And so this is the current plan that we're working from. When we take a look at the plan, it is $163 billion. The plan that was approved in 2015 was $130 billion in 2020 dollars. So it is an increase over the last plan. About $83.5 billion of that plan goes to capital. So capital would be improvements on the roadways, but also improvement in terms of transit and commuter rail, those type of things. About $41.8 billion or 26% of that money is allocated or expected to be spent on operations, $16.5 billion on local streets and roads, $12.4 billion on other programs, which includes the housing and real estate components of the plan that we have, and then $8.3 billion on debt service. And this is because we bond against some of the revenue that comes in from sales taxes, for instance, and so we have to pay it back. So $163 billion plan. So before I do that, I kind of want to talk about the evolution of the plan. So SANDAG is really an aggregator of all the information and data that occurs in the region. So we take the general plans of each one of the jurisdictions in San Diego and the county of San Diego, and we ask them down to the parcel level, what do you believe is going to be built on that parcel? Is it commercial? Is it residential? Is it retail? What are the densities and that type of thing? And so what we do is we take that information along with state law and we create this plan. But what I want to show you here is a map that goes back to 2000. Okay, so in 2000, when we were developing this plan, we thought, what would the region look like in 20 years? And this map shows where we believed housing was going to be, which are the blue dots, and where job growth was going to be, which are the purple dots. And this is what San Diego was supposed to look like last year. Take a look at how much land we thought in 2000 was going to be used for housing that was out in places like Warner Springs, out by Jacumba, all up and down the 15 corridor. So that was the vision for San Diego back in 2000. And this is what was going to happen in 2020. But fast forward 20 years, and this is the new vision of San Diego. You see a lot more green on the map. The green is zoned open space. Okay, so there have been a lot of rules and regulations and that have kept people from being able to build in the backcountry. That's reflected by this map over here. But also you see that a lot of the growth is now concentrated in the western 1/3 of the region. So this map represents our latest forecast. This is what we believe San Diego will look like in 2050. So you see that it's much more dense in the western region. And I have a couple more maps I'm going to show you where we believe new housing is going to be built. The philosophy behind the regional plan, at least the 2021 plan, is really connecting people with the locations that they need to be going to. So their jobs and housing and kid activities and things like that. So connection is really kind of the overriding theme. But what really is driving the plan there are the 5 big moves, and you may have heard about the 5 big moves. And I just want to briefly go over those so you can kind of understand what our thinking is doing. So the first one is the next operating system, which really talks about the technology that's going to be happening in the next 30 years that's going to revolutionize the transportation system. This includes things like autonomous vehicles. It includes things like electrification, et cetera. And so that's really going to change the way we get around in the region. The second thing that is a concept in the plan are things that are called mobility hubs. And mobility hubs are really densification of areas within the urban core that will allow people to live and work closer together, thereby reducing the number of vehicle miles they travel, and then thereby reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So SANDAG's plans need to abide by state law, and there are many state laws out there that require us basically to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and the number of vehicle miles traveled. That's why you see these type of concepts coming into play, these more urban core areas. This map shows, just because I'll be talking about this a little bit, but these are where we envision mobility hubs being. So the concept of a mobility hub is this more densified area where housing is, right? And where people live and work. And these are the ones throughout the region. So depending upon which area you focus on, that's what it looks like. The third concept that we have in the regional plan is the concept of flexible fleets. And this is the thought that, like with Uber and Lyft, where you don't necessarily need to have a vehicle to make every trip. Possibly those vehicles could be shared, for instance. And so if you had a fleet of autonomous vehicles in the future that you could just take an app, you could say, I want to go from here to here. It picks you up, it drops you off. Many people would probably not even need to have, for instance, a second car, right? Because you would probably, in a family, you could have one car, might not need the second one. So flexible fleets and different methods of getting around, electric bikes, et cetera, those type of things are worked into the plan. That's the third big move. The fourth big move is transit leap. So this talks about tying some of those pink dots that I showed you, those mobility hubs, together. So this is the commuter rail, which is a higher speed rail than we currently have. So these are vehicles traveling 80 to 100 miles an hour that would tie together places everywhere from the border up to Oceanside and be competitive with the automobile. And they're really meant for the longer trips. And then finally, there's the concept of complete corridors. And this is where we take technology and we apply the technology to the existing roadway. So right now, if you think about what happens on the roads, it's complete chaos, right? I mean, you have a motorcycle that's following an ambulance, and then you've got some cement truck and a garbage truck trying to get up a hill, and it really is a mess. And so what ends up happening is that the capacity of the freeways are really not optimized. But by applying technology and being able to designate different areas for different purposes, what we can do is create things that are called managed lanes. That's what you'll hear that terminology, where you have the transit, like the high and higher occupancy vehicles traveling in certain lanes. There'll still be general purpose lanes for people who have single occupancy vehicles to do trips, and there'll be other forms of transportation to try to alleviate some of the traffic that is on the current freeways. This map shows the San Diego region and the mobility hubs there. So you've got the border down there, and then we have up at the top, we have Orange County, if you look at it that way. So you see the map here. So if you think about how we serve the entire region, you'll see that this next slide here with the blue, this is the reach of the flexible fleet. So the assumption is if you work in a mobility hub, but you don't live in a mobility hub, because San Diego is pretty much built out the way it is right now, how do we get there? These flexible fleets would allow you to, about 80% of the people, maybe 85% of the people, to have a way to get to a mobility hub. Okay, that would be the solution for that. On top of that, there is, in the plan, is a system of managed lanes or corridors, much like the I-15, and you'll see them going up the 5 and on the 8 and many of the major freeways with connectors where you would hopefully not need to get off of a managed lane and you'd be able to navigate your way around the region. On top of that, we have our next generation rapid system, which is the next generation of, the only way you can really describe it is as buses, but they're really not buses. They would be right-sized vehicles for the trip. Again, technology being applied to take, if you have 6 people who need to go somewhere, you'd right-size a vehicle that you would send for that purpose, rather than sending a big bus that carries 80 people and it has 6 people in it. On top of that, we have the light rail system, which is our existing blue line trolley that you know of. There's an additional purple line trolley that would be built that goes from the border all the way up to Kearney Mesa, which is one of the job centers. And then we have improvements on some of the other trolley systems. And then finally, the high-speed rail that we talked about. So this is not high-speed rail like you hear that they're building in the California high-speed rail. This is high-speed commuter rail. So this is what I was talking about, like 80 miles an hour with stops going all the way up to Oceanside from the border. So that's kind of the layers. Now this creates 10,000 points of connections throughout our region where people can move from one form of transportation to another. Again, part of our problem is that right now, if you get off of the coaster, for instance, then how do you get to your destination, right? So we have to have a flexible fleet or something take you that last mile. This is, I put this in here for Supervisor Desmond, because I don't know if you've seen this slide, sir, but these are the improvements that we're thinking for the 78 corridor. And what you see here is that there are a lot of different options. Okay, so it's not just widening the 78 corridor, but it's including some type of light rail, commuter rail, managed lanes, et cetera, that traverse the entire area. So people have options depending upon how far they're going. Every area has its own issues that we deal with. The 78 corridor, part of the problem is that a lot of people who commute, they commute 1 or 2 exits. And they get on the 78 for 2 exits, they get off. There are far fewer trips that actually traverse the entire 78. So it has to be looked at from a very specific example compared to other places in the region. This is South Bay. This is what South Bay looks like. So these are the bike lanes, and you see the managed lanes over here. You see some of the improvements in the trolley system. So again, an entire grid pattern of alternate forms of transportation that we can use. And I'll just show you Sorrento Valley real quickly. This is the new trolley extension that we just put in, the blue line that goes to UCSD. And then you can see that there are additional improvements that are slated for this particular area. And I'm going to make all of these slides available to you, so I'll give them to Ryan so he can give them to you if you're interested in looking at them in more detail. Really quickly, these are the job centers within San Diego. And the reason I bring this up is that about 1/3 of the trips within the region that we have to accommodate through the regional plan is getting people to their jobs. 83% of the population works in one of the areas that it's on this colored map over here. And this is work that SANDAG did before the regional plan in order to figure out, like, how do we travel throughout the region? Where do people go and where do they come from? I promised you a couple of maps to show you where the growth in San Diego is going. And this particular map shows you population growth. And what it shows you is in the existing population are the yellow dots, and the population by 2050 are those purple dots. And so what this is really showing you is that what the footprint of San Diego is in terms of housing and commercial businesses doesn't really change. What ends up happening is there's a densification that's going to occur. And it occurs where you see those red areas. So a lot in Mission Valley. There's only one area of new growth, which is down off of the 125. There's some area for greenfield development, but according to all of the plans that we're looking at, gone are the days of putting in subdivisions like Scripps Ranch or Mira Mesa, where we would flatten a couple of canyons and put in 10,000 houses. All of the development now is looked at as being infill development. So that's the direction that we're going. These are the areas that we see that infill development happening. And that's for the most part. Now, housing growth, this shows you where housing is. And it's the same thing as the pink dots are showing you the existing housing in 2016. And then the new housing by 2050 is in purple. And you can see that they're kind of exactly in the same area. And I don't know why that map is over there, but that's interesting. Okay. I just wanted to show you again, concept of mobility hubs overlaid on top of where housing and employment is. So housing is the yellow, and and the jobs are the green. And what you can see is that the mobility hubs really overlay that. That's where we got that concept from. So those are the areas in the region that will be densified. I have just a couple more slides and then I'm going to hand it back to Ryan. Single family home prices have continued to increase. You know that. I know that's what you guys have been speaking about all day today. 2021, we saw an increase of about 15% in home prices. And depending upon whose forecast you're looking at, 2022 looks like housing prices continue to increase even further. In San Diego, we're short by about 100,000 units from my calculations, about 60,000 in essentially units that weren't built since the Great Recession due to changes in the way we're building houses. In the past, we used to build 30, 40,000 units a year. When we're putting in subdivisions, we don't do that anymore. So we're not keeping up with that demand. And then when you start taking houses off for things like Airbnbs, you end up reducing the stock. So we took a look at that and we took a look at vacation rentals too. And what we found is that about 100,000 housing unit shortage in San Diego right now. And that's what keeps the prices as high as they are in part. This is San Diego region housing affordability. And what this shows is the number of people who could afford to purchase the house that they currently live in based on their income. Before the 2008 recession, you saw that about 10% of the people in San Diego could afford. So 1 out of 10 people could afford to buy the house that they lived in. We had the real estate crash, affordability went up. Okay, so all of a sudden it was about 46%. And you think that's great. Lots of people can buy the houses, but that's where you got all the people doing flips and buying the houses cash. So it really didn't translate into average income people buying houses. And then you've seen affordability kind of go down to 22%. The only difference between, and then prices are higher now, right? Incomes are not that much higher. So the only difference between a 10% affordability and 22% affordability is mortgage interest rates, because the rates are still relatively low. Therefore, people can afford to borrow a lot more money and they're putting themselves into debt purchasing houses. I wanted to show you this graph on the right because this is to me, it's very important as an economist when I look at this. When you take a look at the median income in San Diego, it's $66,000. That would allow somebody to buy a house that was $315,000. How many houses in the region are $315,000? Okay, there are none. Okay. If you had two people earning median income and they went in together to purchase a house, they could buy a house that was about $623,000. That's still far below what the median price home is. If you wanted to buy a house that is $825,000, which is about what the median price home is right now, you would have to have a household income of $159,000. There are not that many jobs in San Diego that really pay that much when you take a look at the entire population and what people are earning. So housing affordability is a huge issue in San Diego, and I just wanted to share some of those numbers with you. The final thing about the plan that I wanted to talk about, and this is my final slide, is that housing is now an integral part of our plan, much more so than it was in the past. In 2021, we had about $6.8 million in the plan that came from the state to try to help with different type of housing programs. In 2022, we're estimating that about $43 million will come to San Diego to help this. We're working with the BIA right now to try to understand how best to distribute that type of money. Is it to help by doing bridge loans, for instance, for developers who have to get through an environmental process? Is it helping them with the environmental process? We haven't figured this out yet, but what we see is that there is going to be money coming from the state of California to help with these type of things, and that's worked into the plan. And then in terms of the regional plan, over the course of the next 30 years, we're looking at about $2.63 billion of that $163 billion is really invested into housing. And with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Ryan. Now the people who really make the decisions can tell you exactly what's going to happen. So.
Ray, thank you so much as always. You guys, great information from Ray, right? We are working on putting together a full economic summit later in the spring. And Ray, look forward to having you join with us at that time. And I promise you more than 15 minutes. So thank you. And thank you for being flexible.